Oh my goodness, we are live. It is time for try not to snooze. What? Try not to yawn immediately after hitting go live. It is time. I've been waiting on this for about a I've been waiting on this for about a month now. It's been too long, but I need to put more water into this. That's okay. I'm gonna go over a debate today. I'm gonna go over a debate that is my own debate, the first debate that I've ever done, first formal one-on-one debate that I've ever done. Okay, first ever debate that I've ever done, and I am not looking forward to it because it's really just going to be me cringing at myself, knowing what I could have done better. But that's the whole part of reviewing oneself is learning where I messed up, which is gonna be everywhere, and seeing what I could have done better and the commentary therein. So I don't think I will spend too much time talking because there's nobody here to really talk with. Let's see here. Share the screen with that. All right, it's set up. It's here. I'm not looking forward to it because I know first of all I know that this is my first ever one-on-one debate. So I went into this the best that I could have done under the circumstances of I've never done this before and I had a little bit of trouble doing under pressure. And I'm not used to this whole debating thing just yet, but it is my first attempt of putting myself out there because I want my voice to be heard. I want to put my thoughts out there as well. I keep seeing all of these various takes, retarded takes about the way things are going and how people seem to ignore what's happening right in front of their eyes, and they tell me that I should ignore what I'm seeing and ignore what I've been thinking. And just agree with everything that they say. And I'm like, no, why? Why should I do that? What do you have? What do you have in your art that would make me agree with you just off rip? Why should I do that? It doesn't it didn't make sense to me then. It doesn't make sense to me now for me to just accept whatever it is that somebody tells me. So, this is my first attempt. I need to and I need to at some point I need to do it again. There are plenty of topics to go over, and I really should be going into various places like TikTok, Facebook. Well, basically do the Andrew route because I feel like I'm in the same position. There I go, mentioning someone else again. This is my own stream. It's not his stream. But I do need to go over this debate, and I had need to. First of all, another thing. I need to have more. but that's just me. This is me doing quick 5 minutes of rambling because I, I I'm going to cringe a lot. I'm not going to like watching myself do this because I know I could have done better. Even though it was my first attempt at a debate, even though it was oh, I need to hello. Cringing. First ever debate. Criticize myself harshly. Don't I have a link? No. Share in a post. Oh, well, look at that. Let's criticize myself harshly. Yep. Fine. Process. All right, cool. Now that that's out of the way. Go for it. Oh. That's what that's, yeah. I'll do that later. Anyway. Why don't I don't know. Anyway, uh I'm just doing some stuff on a little stuff on the side. We will get into the debate itself. Yeah, throughout this debate, since this is basically me doing commentary on the debate itself, my own critiques of my opponent, critiques of myself, There's not going to really critiques of myself. There's just going to be uh, the point of it is to understand where I could improve. And since this is my first debate, there will be much, and I mean much, that I can improve upon. Going through this debate, I will be able to, I guess, pinpoint and give like moment to moment thoughts on either what my thinking was at the time, or what I remember to be my thinking was at the time, or not even what I remember to be, but what I could think. Because maybe I don't really remember. I've already sort of put it outside my head at this point because it's a past event. Not really. I have mixed results, mixed cases of me remembering things in my past, either to the letter or a placebo. Sometimes it sort of varies, but either way, I'll give commentary of my thought process here, my thought process then, and see whether or not I could do better. It'll be more so just a train of thought level of review and critique. But I think I've waited long enough, 11 minutes or so. It's no better time than the present to start. So let's get to this.
I think you have to present it on your side there,
Yep.
Speakeasy.
What? All right.
So the question.
1stAmender starts off, and I've seen this before in a couple of other debates that he's had with other folks. Is he brings a PowerPoint. He brings a PowerPoint to his debates. So I knew this going in, that he would bring some sort of cards. So of course I had to let him do that because this is just his opening statement. I had an opening statement myself, but I think I fumbled it because I didn't. I conflated my. I haven't even gone all that into it, but I conflated what the point of my opening statement was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be a rebuttal. What I would do right after this, as a response opening statement, was comment on 1stAmender, do two things at the same time badly, which is have my own opening statement while also responding and rebutting what 1stAmender does in his opening statement. I'm not good at that yet. I should have stuck to one or the other and then either gotten to his rebuttals afterward, or focus solely on the rebuttal as the opening statement. Didn't do either, so I failed on that note. Anyway.
The question is, does systemic racism exist? A debate with 1stAmender.
It does.
You can find me on youtube.com/ at 1stAmender. You could check out my channel and consider subscribe. What is systemic racism? Systemic racism are racial disparities that are produced and maintained by institutions, laws, and policies and social systems, even when nobody is intending to discriminate.
I went into this debate solely to learn, because I was like, even though this was a head-to-head and I wanted to share my thoughts, I also know that I'm not very knowledgeable on specifics. I just have like general thoughts, general know-how, just from things I've observed over the years, over this last year. And I'm now just trying to starting to apply what I've been hearing all of this time. So when I saw this, I honestly didn't know what to make of it. It sounded nice. It sounded correct, but I could tell in my mind that part of me was simply agreeing because, oh, this looks prim and proper. Oh, this looks like this is very professional. And for all of my life growing up, basically Democrat, basically as the skin color that I am, this is what I've just come to understand innately. When really what I should be doing is questioning, probably, and even then, like, questioning the validity of such a description.
It's all about outcomes. Intent does not matter. Imagine that there is a system built decades ago with openly racist rules. Even if you remove the racist language later, the effects can still persist.
A lot of what's going to happen this entire debate is me just looking at what he's saying and not understanding what he's talking about, but not necessarily understanding how I can articulate a question to challenge why this doesn't make sense to me. Because I remember one of the most vivid feelings this entire debate. I'll let him play off. I need to let him play off his entire his entire opening statement, because I haven't let him just finish his opening statement, because I have thoughts that happen in real time. I need to get them out. Most of this debate, I remember this vividly. It was the most impactful part of this whole debate for me, which was, what are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. All about outcomes, intent does not matter. So, like I guess one of the first questions that comes into my mind right now when I look at this is, so I guess the people who wrote these laws didn't intend for this to extend past the point that they were in power. That wasn't the intent. Anyway.
Example, race was barred from owning property in certain areas, such as HOA restricting minorities in predominantly white neighborhoods, as well as redlining laws. Property ownership is the main way that wealth is accumulated. Wealth determines the school, the neighborhoods, the credit, as well as political power. The detail. Redlining occurred nationwide. Redlining is the practice of denying people access to credit because of where they live, even if that they are personally qualified for loans. Historically, mortgage lenders once widely redlined core urban neighborhoods and black-populated neighborhoods in particular. The 1968 Fair Housing Act outlawed racially motivated redlining and tasked federal financial regulators, including the Federal Reserve, with enforcement. Redlining was found even after it was banned formally.
Hold on a second. Realizing that traffic is in fact noisy and I can't hear out of one side of my screen. Oh, and you know what? I should probably change over so that it's not
in 1968. Example, 50 years after being outlawed, redlining still drives neighborhood health inequities. Discriminatory lending practice continues to have serious effects. This is from University of Berkeley of Public Health. Decades of redlining, a long-standing banking practice that blocked people out of color from getting mortgages, continue to perpetuate racial and socioeconomic inequality.
Questions
in
for
the
later.
San Francisco Bay Area and across the country, according to ongoing research from UC Berkeley School of Public Health. Redlining exists and existed, but so what? Well, education. The school you went to from K through 12 is associated with the district that you grew up in. A majority of funding for K through 12 public schools overwhelmingly comes from local property taxes. In 2021 school year, around 44.1% of public school funding came from states. The total funding of the source per student you could observe local and state is overwhelming majority where funding comes from, which means a majority of your funding is in fact property taxes. Education continued. Schools are funded through property taxes, and property taxes are garnered based on a percentage of the total value of the home appraised by the government, often lower than its actual perceived market value. If a property tax is, say, 4%, one house is worth $125,000 versus a home worth $1.2 million. million. That is a huge difference in how much funding is allocated. 48,000 in yearly property tax versus 5,000 in a poorer district. This means poorer districts fundamentally receive less money and therefore worse education depending on the zip code that they are born in.
So with this, and I didn't see it beforehand because I was too nervous and too under pressure for me to preparing my own statement to notice this before. But here, he already defeats his own argument by saying, but he already, by mentioning the fact that this is just poor districts. Again, and I would go into this a little later during the discussion portion, but poor doesn't mean, poor isn't racial. That doesn't mean, I think I could have articulated it better at the time and still think so now, just don't know how. But bringing up the fact that it was poor automatically defeats the fact that it was racial, because if there are other races that are poor, if there other races are poor, they would also be subject to this. They would also be subject to this redlining. It doesn't matter if he's going to go based off of outcomes, then the outcome of the fact that it's poorer neighborhoods, meaning that anybody who falls under this threshold of what poor is subject to this redlining, meaning that it can't really be racial, otherwise it would be targeting. There's a target, which is where it's sort of intent does matter at that point, because if it's racial, because if you're going to be racial about it, then you have to intend that the outcome disproportionately affects black people.
The impact of redlining. Poor K through 12 education means minorities often underperform in terms of educational attainment. Why? Because opportunity was removed from them at the time of birth. No.
Again, this didn't make sense to me, and I was struggling for most of this debate. It's just going to be me struggling to find the words of how to really say, what are you talking about? I don't understand. I don't get it.
No racist actor is required. Ask yourself this. When you visit your Rosa Parks Drives and your Martin Luther King Avenues across the country, not in 1969, but today, do you see an overwhelming amount of proportionate population to U.S. statistics? Or is it overwhelmingly minority somehow situated in that location? What do you think the cause of that is?
People moved there? Culture? There are plenty of other reasons as to why these areas exist the way they do. There were plenty of areas around the country of affluent, minority, mostly minority cities. I mean, look at anything Jewish. Look at the Armenians. Look at Glendale. Some of the richest places might have like minorities in them, as well as some of the poorer places. So it's like, if you're gonna go based off of income, then there are cases all over the country of various minorities with the income, not least of which is Asians, particularly like the Chinese and Japanese and whatnot, the Far East Asians, who live a much wealthier life and much more affluent neighborhoods than even the white folk of this country, who are the majority population.
Ergo, if what I said is true, then systemic racism exists. And syllogistically, the definition of systemic racism exists if and only if a social system contains race-based rules or inherited structures that predictably produce racial disparities in outcomes independent of individual intent. Premise 1. Any system whose rules or inherited structures predictably produce racial disparities in outcomes independent of individual intent is systemically racist. The U.S. housing and education system contains inherited structures originating in redline that...
I don't know if anyone who watches up to this point will see me and see the gears turning in my head when I read this, but these same gears were turning in my head when he was making this as his opening statement, because it was just, even trying to be charitable and giving him this, it just doesn't make sense. Because it's like saying, based on these rules I've established, therefore this is systemically racist. Where did this come from? Is essentially what I'm asking my head. But you know, yeah.
Predictably produce racial disparities in educational outcomes independent of individual intent. Conclusion, therefore, systemic racism exists in the United States.
I'm also cringing because I know that my opening statement comes up next, and I know that I completely botch it. But the point of me going into my and reading my own opening statement is simply, what can I do better?
Thank you. And you can follow me at youtube.com/@
He
First
looks
Amendment.
ugly here, bro.
All right, you still.
I'm not. I'm not looking forward to hearing my opening statement because it's all over the place. I don't want to hit play, but I have to.
At 5 minutes, is that all you wanted to do there?
That's it. That's all I
All
needed.
right, thank you for that opening statement. And with that, we are going to hand the mic over to Tomahawk. And Tomahawk, whenever you are ready for your opening statement.
Yeah, I should have just focused on the fact that this was an opening statement, but I tried to also make a rebuttal as well in this opening statement. And I should not have done that because my priorities were jiggled. They were jarred. They were conflated, and they shouldn't have been.
I will start the timer up with your voice.
Right. When one normal speed, because I need to hear every moment. One defines systemic racism. What often comes up is black people oppressed, black people without the opportunity to. I think it was cool of me to go this route. Cool. It was fine. But I think what I was missing was substantiating the reasoning, was substantiating the importance of bringing it up. I don't think I really did a good job in substantiating why I was bringing this up. Advance in society through education, career, or entrepreneurship, and how people of color historically did not have as much opportunity as white folk. My opponent brought up redlining. My opponent brings up the. This is where I messed up because I tried to modify my opening statement to include my opponent's point without focusing on a sort of rebuttal. Without simply just focusing on the opening statement. The fact that property taxes are the ones that fund schools, but usually when you talk about those, when you talk about in my voice where my mind is somewhere else, but my mouth continues to function. I was also extremely nervous. When talking about redlining like that, when talking about property taxes, it doesn't take into account those I can't sit still either. Those that escaped, those that those people who, even though they may come from those worse off towns, but they pardoned themselves and they brought up they through adversity they were able to. I really hate hearing myself stutter and stumble over my words this badly. Oh my god. That is something that only, and of course that only comes with practice of understanding who I am as a person and feeling as calm as I feel right now. God damn. To move out of those bad, quote unquote, bad
It's just
towns,
your
those
first
red
debate,
line
man.
towns, into
Just your
better
first debate.
neighborhoods,
We'll
and then
continue
were
to do
able to
this
still
as
take
time
part
goes
in
on.
those same resources and opportunities given to them by the better property counterparts. The opportunities are there. And I would define it as racist. I would personally define it as racism on the level that is encouraged by the institution to favor one race or ethnicity over another, similar to what my opponent brought up in terms. I didn't need to say this. I don't think I need to say this. But I did say it because I wanted to at least give my opponent some grace. Give my opponent due prop and credit where it was due. Because I'm just like that. I'm generous. I'm generous like that. I like to I want to always give my whoever I'm talking with, whether they're on the other side or they're not, their credit. So, you were born in it, so to speak. In this case, it would be like legislation, national through state, career, education, policing / enforcement. Pre-1964, the gatekeepers to almost all of the forms of influence and power in the United States were white people because, well, they were the majority ethnicity. They are still the majority ethnicity. Therefore, they're going to be able to, through their country and their settlers, they helped build the nation that we have today. You were treated better if you were white because, well, that was normal. That was considered normal, and through slaves and through redlining and stuff, through slaves and the slavery and whatnot, you had the fact that those minorities would come into American society as a quote unquote lower class because they were not given the opportunity to essentially show what they could do. Post the Civil Rights Act of 1964, these differences were essentially legislated out, with the culture following suit over the next 3 decades through education. And through education, at that point, all resources, opportunities, places of business, entrepreneurship, in a sense, I defeated his argument here with the fact that the outcomes of society post 1964 and the passing of the Civil Rights Act and later the Voting Rights Act of 1965 demonstrated that the land and the country became less systemically racist due to the fact that these specific laws existed and then percolated and permeated throughout American society. The outcome was the culture of the 1980s, 90s, and early 2000s, where race did not become as large of an issue, to where we didn't talk about race the same way we talked about it pre-1964 and post-Obama's second term. We didn't talk about race the same way. It was subdued. It was lowered. So, for there to truly be any sort of systemic racism, we didn't talk about race as though race was the end all and be all. We talked about race more as an adjective, a description of of the heritage someone came from. That was the extent of racial discussion, at least when I was growing up. Nowadays, it's gone back to, and that's due to leftists, but now it's gone back to who you are as a person. That race defines you, when it should not have, and it didn't when I was young. Became open to all citizens through the 14th Amendment, Brown versus Board of Education, which all culminated into the Civil Rights Act of 1964. At that point, like I said, all resources, opportunities based on creed became available to everyone. I should have stopped talking. I think I had a little bit more in my opening statement right after this, right after giving all these examples, but I should have stopped. American citizen from that day forth. You could not hire, fire, deny based on creed, sex, orientation, or race, or national origin. It would take time to get used to, as was the friction that was caused right after the passing of that law. But at that point, it's been codified, and then through those next 3 decades of education, of telling basically the populace, hey, your neighbor is the same as you under the U.S. Constitution. U.S. Constitution, it would smooth out over time. All this to say, everyone in America has the ability, the opportunity, the potential drive to pursue any career field, entrepreneur chance, employment, resource, job, etc. in the United States. Redlining, in that sense, is not a real viable.
At this point, this is me trying to give a rebuttal, and I should have stopped because my opening statement was before this sentence. Was before this point. That was my opening statement. I should have just left it at that, and then go hard into redlining after that.
A real viable stopping point, because even with its banning, and sure, you may have effects of it, but that's really up to the fact that people. He did mention education, but that's just it. If you learn that you have the opportunity, you have the ability to go set out for yourself and be better, which is where this whole thing comes from in terms of systemic racism. And telling basically an entire populace that they can't do more with themselves because of subjective at this point subjective effects of past deeds.
How did I increase the speed?
The fact that at this point they can, that is the main point of contention when talking about whether or not systemic racism exists. When you tell an entire populace that they can't,
That actually isn't. After, like, everything after the opportunities portion, I had finished my opening statement. That was it. Should have just stopped talking and waited for the rebuttal to respond to his whole redlining point. Because now I just sound stupid and untrained.
can do something, and you encourage them to go forth and at least attempt it. You can't really call in systemic racism when not only can they do it, but a lot of them have done it. You have many examples. You have Clarence Thomas, you have Jasmine Crockett, you have all of these. Those are just two examples of people who, in a sense, have made it. They came from essentially, and those people.
So I defeated his outcome argument right there. But I was too nervous to understand that I had already beaten his outcome argument right there.
People came from either the slums or I think Ben Carson's case. I'm not too sure on that. However, they are all very well renowned, and very well educated people. So even though you have a population that still is in the ghettos, there's other reasons for why that still is the case.
I gave my
for at least those bunch of people. How would my opponent reconcile with the fact that you have a whole bunch of very well-educated Black people and very well-educated minorities, especially in the Asian community, that came in from slums, came in through the slums, through being treated as less than, and then came up to be one of the premier minority groups in America.
This is me mentioning offhandedly the Japanese.
Everyone in America has the ability to advance, has the ability to take resources and be able to collect within themselves, and be able to collect for their own. What my opponent would need to answer to, and I don't think he can, to any real specificity other than talking about redlining, which can be explained away through the fact that there are a whole bunch of people from those same communities that thought to themselves, even I learned that I still have all of these opportunities.
I'm glad
tools.
I said this.
I can still make something
need
for
to
myself.
stop talking.
I can still make something for the people around me, and I would be determined to
It's just because I'm all over
go
the place.
forth
I'm all
and
over
make
the
a name
place,
for
and so
myself. That's why you have your I so far my examples come from people who have made it to positions of power. Your Clarence Thomases, your Baron Donalds, your Ben Carsons, Jasmine Crockett, Barack Obama being the pinnacle of this whole. You have the opportunity. You were given the opportunity. You now and therefore you can make it. The fact that we have that things like Barack Obama's election into being the president in 2008 meant that we can do anything. We have the opportunity to. There, all of the tools are there at our disposal. We just need to use it. And what continues to happen is that, especially with people on the left, we're just told, oh, just from birth that you can't do it. Just from birth, it's pretty much set in stone. When that's not the case. It was the case before in pre 1964, but after the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, basically telling everyone that you can make it in America. It doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter where you came from, you can make it. All that's left is simply knowing how you can make it. And that's where institutions, and particularly on the left, tend to falter and tend to keep that information away from Black people.
I really should have stopped talking 5 minutes ago. My opening statement was done. Woo! I'll learn to be more concise in the future. And I think since this debate, I've been really hammering in on getting my thoughts out, and then on getting my thoughts out, and then stop talking.
Systemic racism couldn't really exist when
really got to
everyone
me.
today
And
now has the
nerves
opportunity to
manifest in
succeed.
me
Now has
somebody
the
that
means
just
of
talks a
which
whole bunch
to
without
succeed for
finishing.
themselves. They just need to go out there and take it. The right
I'm really more of a listener anyway.
encourages this. They say, we will give you the tools. We teach you how these things work. We teach you the way that in which you are able to do so. Whereas the left does not give you those tools. They just say, well, you just can't do it. Through things like redlining, because you live in a poorer town, you just can't do it.
Also, me talking as much as I have been also gave my opponent many avenues to work with that I didn't take advantage of. Again, it's just my first. I will get better after this.
When the whole point of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is to tell you categorically that you can. I'm going to end off saying, so this is systemic racism. If it were to be a real problem in today's day and age, it's a problem. Therefore, it's a problem that needs to be solved. And if you can't categorically solve this problem or lessen it to the point where it becomes a non-issue, why continue to fight? Why continue to bring up as a point of issue, if not to gain something from it, from the fact that of the issue itself and what it causes? For that, I yield my time.
Oh, finally!
Alrighty, thank you for that opening statement,
I
Tomahawk.
finally stopped.
And that will wrap up the opening statements for both sides. We're going to move into the rebuttal here.
Yeah.
Each debater has 5 minutes.
That's the whole thing. I could have just done my opening statement and that was it. I treated it like a rebuttal. Oh my god. Damn. And it's like, and what happens now is that even though my opponent has a rebuttal, and then I have the rebuttal, and it's like, I think in my mind at the time, I was like, wait, rebuttal? Oh shit. I basically just said my rebuttal in my opening statement. So one of the key takeaways
in this debate, in debates in general, especially if they're formal, is if I'm gonna have an opening statement, focus on the opening statement. Opening statement, focus on that. That's number one. Save any rebuttals. Save any rebuttals that I have for the actual rebuttal section. That way I can be more focused on what my opponent said, and I can dismantle specific, and I can then focus all of my energy on the rebuttal itself. I essentially did two things with my opening statement, which was give my opening statement and also give my rebuttal. I didn't need to do that. And I just kept rambling and rambling on, and nerves took over, really. Nerves and pressure took over. And I would admit this throughout. I admit this like towards the end and during the after panel. To be honest, I don't think there will be much in the way of actual critique, because it'll mostly just be 1stAmender speaking and me being speechless. I give a lot of spoilers. I should just keep going.
Uninterrupted, so no interjections or nothing. And then after that, we'll get into open floor. So we're going to hand the mic back over here to 1stAmender. And 1stAmender, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer up with your voice.
I'm ready. For starters, you said that it does not take into account those that escaped. It does. It just generally means that minorities did suffer as a result. This does not mean that there are not black people that could not get a leg up. There certainly could.
And did. One thing that I regret not going after this entire debate is the fact that it's not that the people could. It's not that they could. It's that they did. But for some reason, 1stAmender doesn't acknowledge the fact that people did get out. They did. And if a system was truly racist, was truly systemically racist, there would not be any examples or any demonstrations of people doing it, of people getting out, because the system is all encompassing. The system, as it should work, should not allow for people to escape. It's a system. It is well oiled. It's a well oiled machine. Therefore, there won't be cracks. There won't be things that slip through. There wouldn't be things that slip through. Now, let him finish his rebuttal. But that's the big thing, is that, yeah, people could, and he would fall back on this throughout the debate whenever I would try to hammer him on this. He said, yeah, they could. Yeah, but did they? Those examples fly in the face of outcomes because they did. That is an outcome.
It's entirely possible. We know this to be a fact. The fact is, though, that minorities have had, in fact, lower educational attainment and higher household income, or lower household income being a good example of that. Black people historically, and even to this day, have lower household income, which means that there is less money that goes towards higher education. You were treated better. You stated you were treated better if you were white because that was normal. Okay, so if you acknowledge that, that would actually mean that you are agreeing that there were systems that cause rippling effects of racism.
The keyword was were, not are. Because the prompt is, meaning presently, is it systemically racist? Is there systemic racism in America? Presently, is there? Is there? And the answer would be no,
due to having all of these programs that prop up all of these various minorities into higher levels of influence, higher education, places of power. Like, what are we doing here in that sense? Anyway.
Right? And then you stated you can't hire and fire based on race. That's wrong. You 100% can.
Yeah, but they would have to. There needs to be an actual reason behind why they would be firing them based on race or creed. You can't just say because you're black.
Just because you cannot list the formal reason of firing somebody, you do not have to list that it is because of race. You could simply cite something such as poor work performance, and that is sufficient and totally allowed.
And yet, that would mean that you can't. It wouldn't be systemically racist because you would not be able to quote unquote prove that the intent behind the firing was racist. And you wouldn't be able to prove that the system is in fact the scapegoat as to the scapegoat and the avenue for which you would cite it being racist, racially motivated.
But the underlying predicate could absolutely be a racial one. You then stated that you can get any job or education that you like. Well, that's somewhat true, but also not necessarily true. If you do not have the money, for example, you're rather limited in what specific education you can get or job that you would be able to attain. If people have poorer socioeconomic status, this would reduce a person's ability to succeed compared to white counterparts. This does not mean black people cannot succeed, but rather that there does exist a systemic issue that pushes others down. And I can prove that through redlining. When you tell you stated, when you tell a population that they can do something, then you can't call against systemic racism. I once again am going to say that you can. I agree that you can do something, and it is totally possible to succeed. This does not, however, dismantle whether or not that systemic racism does exist. It does. You then stated there are other reasons as to why somebody would be in the ghetto. And my answer is yes. And sometimes it is also because of systemic racism. I'm not saying someone who grew up in a poor area couldn't help themselves. They certainly can, but that does not mean it does not exist. I love that you brought up as an example Clarence Thomas as being successful. I want to let you know that Clarence Thomas, and you should look up the history of Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas is the ultimate DEI hire. Systemic racism did exist in that there were no black students allowed in Yale. In fact, in any Ivy League school were black students allowed, enabling someone access to an Ivy League school. But when black people were then included in Ivy League schools, Clarence Thomas was one of the first. If it were not for pushing back against systemic racism, Clarence Thomas would likely not have been a Supreme Court judge, as having not been in an Ivy League school due to systemic racism.
Something I needed to go over with this whole rebuttal on Clarence Thomas is that he's the ultimate DEI hire, but he wasn't DEI because they didn't necessarily choose him due to him being black necessarily. They chose him. Eventually they chose him because he demonstrated that he could do the fucking job. He could do it. That is a merit-based recognition of skill, not the fact that he was black. In this case, he wasn't a DEI hire. He wasn't the DEI hire. He proved himself. He had a track record to go off of. He had a track record that can be viewed by those who were assessing and evaluating him for the jobs that he would later go on to obtain. The Supreme Court justice, he had the history. He had the accolades to be able to go into and be appointed for one of the highest courts in the land. It wasn't just the fact that he went to a fancy school. people go to fancy schools all the time. In fact, a lot of the acceptance rates have for these fancy schools come off of grants, not come off of whether or not they come through whether they test in or not. But a lot of these people who go to these schools, and I could have said this too, which was, how acceptance rates go and how all of these acceptance rates of, give me a grant, give me a scholarship and whatnot, all of these grant programs for minorities to get into these schools, whether or not they have the testament or have the evaluation necessary to get into these schools, they go in and get into these schools off of not their merit, but because they're black, due to grants that say, if you're black, come apply, we'll help you get in.
And you said it does not matter what you look like, you can make it.
Yes.
I agree, and I think that that's a great.
And people have. He wants to talk about outcomes so much, they can and they have, as evidenced by who's up there, who we've got as representatives of these various minority groups. They're there. They did it. So what are you talking about that there is systemic racism? Because if there truly was systemic racism, there would not be those representations of those people in these places of power.
Error of mentality to have. This, however, does not combat as to whether or not systemic racism or systemic systems that push minorities down do not exist. They certainly do. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you for that rebuttal.
What did I do for
and
my
with
rebuttal?
that, we're going to hand
How
the mic
else did I
over
botch
to
this?
Tomahawk. Tomahawk, whenever you're ready for your uninterrupted rebuttal, I will start the timer up with your voice.
It was a lot to see there, but in your rebuttal, you say that even
I messed up there. I'm rebutting his rebuttal. I should be rebutting his opening statement, which is where I messed up in my own opening statement.
even though minorities did suffer, just because minorities still suffer, there are reasons such as the crack epidemic that came through in the 1970s, as well as welfare systems that were previously not previously that were
I hate this. I hate this a lot. I hate this a lot.
that were introduced to
I
help
also
out.
should not have spoken under my breath. That's another thing. This is just my first a part of me is thinking, why am I even reviewing this when this is just me being completely inexperienced? I don't even know I don't even know what to look for in terms of specific.
Just let me keep poor to help out poor folk in getting them, but that's an entirely separate issue. You can't really say that even if you don't have money isn't racial. Not having the money isn't racial in the sense that
I'm glad I said this.
there are many
just
poor
needed to
communities and people
articulate it
who
better.
may not be able to advance themselves because they don't have money. That's not a racial problem.
go into
that
this?
is a people that is a wealth inequality, and wealth inequality by itself is not racial. There are poor areas all over the country where people of all types, of all races, are not able to advance themselves because of through no fault of their own. And you say
I'm
Clarence
glad
Thomas
I'm
was the
really glad
ultimate
I did say
DEI
this. I
hire
just
because at
didn't
the
go as
time it
hard
was,
into it as I
again, it
could
was
have.
part of what it was part of that friction post
Partially,
the
mostly
Civil
because I
Rights Act of
was
1964, where
way
they
too
were
nervous and too in my own head.
where it was slow for the culture to catch up to what the spirit of the Civil Rights Act was attempting to do. With desegregation, you had he was it was landmark because he was he was the first, he set the stage for many other black judges to come up through the system. He was simply the first, just like Barack Obama was the first black man to be elected president. And through his, he may have been the first one to get there, but he since then proved himself to be one of the premier justices that we have had in this country. You want to talk about who's a real DEI hire? We can bring up Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was appointed during the Biden administration, and we can tell just based on the differences between her dissensions and Clarence Thomas's dissensions, and Clarence Thomas's comments, who truly is the DEI hire, based on the fact that almost every single time that Ketanji Brown Jackson would bring up some dissension, it was only only lodged it, not the word is escaping, I don't have the right word, but she only talked about race. She only brought up the fact that it was just someone was being disadvantaged somewhere, whereas Clarence Thomas would talk about how this would how what was being argued against or argued for was what it meant for the actual for the actual constitution, how it would apply. That's not a racial thing. If anything, the DEI hire at this point would be Ketanji Brown Jackson. And
This is really hard to listen to because I was
I'm
all
just
over
really
the
happy.
place.
But anyway, poor areas, everybody has the thing about everybody having a shot.
I'm moving around just as much as First Amender is. I haven't been watching. I've just been listening because I talk so much because I was so nervous. I was so nervous, and I had already botched my rebuttal by including it in my opening statement. I should have just, and I that is one thing that I know for sure. One of the biggest takeaways of this whole debate was I needed to keep my opening statement to the opening statement. I didn't need to add any of First Amender's points into my opening statement. I didn't need to make any sort of rebuttal towards my opponent in that opening statement. It's just that. It's just an opening statement. And that's what I should have focused on. And I will remember this for all time. The opening statement is just that. It's an opening statement. Any rebuttals that I have for my opponent's arguments will be settled in the uninterrupted rebuttal section like this. I had some solid rebuttals, but I misplaced them. The systems at play, sure, you can come up with any sort of reason for why something, and the underlying may be racial. However, at that point, you would be looking at more individual cases and how that would not be systemic, because at this point, it wouldn't be what am I looking for? Damn it. I can't let myself. That's another one. That is another one. That little portion right there, where I say I don't know what I'm looking for. What am I trying to say here? I should have just stopped talking, honestly. For one.
2, being super nervous, I wasn't thinking straight. And 3, and I know this for next time. I essentially put my rebuttal of First Amender's opening statement in my opening statement. And I said that I already said this before, but yeah. Anyway. I'm going to skip over because now we go into the open panel discussion. Yeah.
So, Tomahawk, I agree.
So let's see where, now that we get to the open portion. This is where the open discussion should be happening. Should happen.
With you that it's possible for somebody to succeed against all odds.
And,
right?
and effectually, I will debate. If anything, I don't believe that. I don't believe myself. This right here does not exist. I'm supplanting myself because I'm much calmer now than I was before. I'm much calmer now, especially because I'm no longer on a clock, and B, not in front of the guy. So, I have the benefit of not having to respond immediately. But this guy here does not exist, essentially, to me, because I am a new man, and this is... Anyway, this is merely commentary of what I could be saying next time.
In fact, I encourage that kind of thought process. I think it is important.
And the first thing he said was could. Okay, could they? Yes. Did they? I really need to hammer home, did they? Did they do that? Because if they did, then systemic racism, if they did do that, then systemic racism clearly isn't all that effective, because all of these examples of people getting through keep happening. Otherwise, the system doesn't seem to be working like that. The system isn't exactly happening the way that it's being described. These people seemingly are disadvantaged, and they don't stay disadvantaged. They move into the advantage. Why does that happen? If systemic racism were to exist, these same people who were disadvantaged would stay disadvantaged because the system would determine it so. All right?
To be like, hey, I can do it. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do. Yes. Okay, but did they do that? Should have been my follow-up question. Sure, they can. And it mentioned that they can. Did they?
Okay. But that doesn't rebut whether or not that there are systems that were designed or that exist today that pushed down
token tomahawk. I appreciate the
minorities, right?
What I guess I would ask at this point, what system would it be that you would be talking about?
So I brought up as an example redlining laws of the past. I understand redlining is illegal now. However, the rippling effects of redlining are pervasive even to this day. And the fact is, right now, they're
the rippling effects of redlining. What does that mean? How would you determine that that's the rippling effects of redlining, Mr. Amender?
don't actually exist any redistributive laws in rich and affluent areas.
Wait. Distributive laws in affluent areas. Isn't that the whole point of gerrymandering? Like, Jerry, isn't that not the whole point, but like one of the points of gerrymandering is that the districts are redrawn based on population, demographic density, what have you. And they essentially redistrict the maps. They redraw the maps to include areas of specific influence. Now, maybe the point isn't, poor or rich, but it definitely involves different sets of people being drawn into a district together in, I guess, in strange ways, as it were.
Putting their property taxes towards their local education. I think there's only 3 states that have a progressive system for that, where they have distributive laws. A majority of states still, the entire
Why would they
education
need?
system is
I guess
funded
my
off of
question.
property taxes and so if whatever the value of the houses in that local location will be.
Something I'm also not used to is letting people kind of just drone on. I interrupt, but I don't like interrupt hard enough. Mainly because I don't want to be rude. I don't want to I don't want to just keep people from talking. But I do recognize when people begin to drone on, and this is something that's been a personal development of mine, is understanding that people begin to drone. Hell, I did it with my first opening statement, but that was merely because I was nervous and wasn't really sure on what to say. But 1stAmender here is droning on, and he's going from point to point to point to point and overwhelming me because of these and overwhelming me due to all the points he keeps bringing up. And I never try to stop him. That's another thing I need to make note of, is I don't try to stop people from putting several points onto the table and being forced to address every single one of them all at the same time. I need to be able to call out and single out singular points one at a time. Because we're all human. Everyone here is human everyone here is human. And we can only process so much at one time. And so I needed to get him to stay to one specific point, stay to one topic, and hammer that out rather than introduce 2 or 3 or 4 more topics afterward, just from him droning on and him filibustering the whole time.
That's how much money actually gets raised to those schools.
How does it get raised? Like, what in the government would be furthering those taxes? What in the system would be the one to distribute those taxes? I heard from some of the panelists soon after this debate that I really could have used my own ignorance as a point of pressure for my opponent. I could really just Joe Rogan caveman this whole thing, because in a sense I'm still learning. I'm still trying to understand, but at the same time I could use that and be like, well, hold on. This, you say like it's like this, but then you say it's like this. From my own understanding, how do the two reconcile? And then force him to explain himself, and then keep calling out where the contradictions keep lying, or where places that don't make sense, such as, oh well, this kind of just happens, and it's like, well, okay, how does it happen? I could really have weaponized my own ignorance in this case, but I was too nervous to really go off of that. And yeah, I think the key thing for this debate especially because it's my first, was I didn't know how to flip the script. And that was one of my biggest downfalls, was letting him filibuster, letting him control all the time, letting him control all the points, and being on the defensive when he should have been on the defensive for being on the for side. This was said by a couple of other people, a couple of comments um, in the debate soon afterward, as well as some of the panelists had pointed this out as well. I didn't do a good job of forcing 1stAmender to explain his side. But he did a good job of forcing myself to explain my side. He did a good job of forcing me to explain my side when I really shouldn't have been the one to explain my side. Because I'm saying that this isn't happening. This is like any other conversation where, oh yeah, this is like this. No, it's not. How would you know? Yes, it is. Okay, prove that it is. I say it's not, and this is why it's not. You say it is. Prove why it is. And then they don't do that. I should have done this. It should be treated the exact same way. But I didn't do that. I was too nervous.
And so if the value of the houses are lower, that would mean people that grow up in specific zip codes would live a fundamentally worse off education all the way from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade.
This applies to anyone who lives in a non-wealthy neighborhood. This applies to anybody. So where's the racism? This concept applies universally. So where's the racism? And I think I was doing the good thing. The thing I will credit myself, and you'll hear it throughout this conversation, is at the very least I did a good job of saying, well, these are more universal concepts anyway. So the system isn't really out to disproportionately affect certain minority groups, when this is a universal concept that anyone who happens to go below a certain threshold would apply to. It would apply to.
Don't you think that would negatively impact your educational attainment?
It could, but would that stop you? Would that stop a particular? The question isn't would, it's did. Did that stop the various examples that I stated? Did that stop them? And what's to say? What is to say that more people aren't doing that right now? What's to say, or who's to say that more people aren't doing that very thing right now? The question wasn't would, it's did. Family who happens to live in that area from sending their child out to a different area at that point. Especially with all of the social and public programs and grants and scholarships that are available to all of these minority and less affluent people groups from attending all of these higher education schools or having the good education. Like, there are so many public programs and social programs out there for just this reason. You'd think that the system wouldn't encourage these things. But we have things within the system that allow for people to take advantage of these public funds, of these grants, to get into places of higher education and have more opportunity, and they have done so. So like, so many avenues to make all of this fall on its face, but I just wasn't aggressive. A different school that would potentially be of higher standing, as it were, because I could see, because I've seen there are plenty of families, there are plenty of schools that accept people from poorer areas that have those sort of progressive policies baked into them, where they have the resources and then extend programs that would programs that would extend their I even did have I did it right there. I even mentioned it. You know, there are programs out there for these folks that exist. How would how would the system be racist if these programs didn't exist? He wants to talk about outcomes. These are these outcomes. These social programs, these grants that exist for just those particular folk. And it's anyone under a certain, and these grants exist for a certain group, especially like they happen to be poor, you know, they come from hard times, they come from single households. Like, the system clearly is doing a bad job being racist when these grants exist for people of all walks of life to get into these higher places of learning and opportunities to grow and be more of themselves. And we see it all the time. In fact, a lot of these colleges, a lot of these institutions thrive on the fact that they have so many of a certain demographic within their school, the quotas, as it were. Although that would that would inherently make the case that there is systemic racism because of all the quotas that exist of how many of a certain demographic, of a certain race or a certain ethnicity are within the ranks of the school or institution or place of employment. But but just because those quotas exist means that the system actually is trying to be not racist by the system is in fact trying not to be racist because they're trying to add more of these people from these certain demographics and not just not just of a certain demographic. It's not inherently, the outcomes of these systems don't favor one don't favor one ethnicity getting into them over others. It's favoring other ethnicities to get in at the same rate as one. Meaning that at some point, or even now actually, that everybody's getting in. The point being that everybody is getting into the system. Everybody can take advantage of the system. And therefore, the system can't be racist because everybody's getting in. So there it is. And redlining, talking about redlining falls flat on its face because poor areas are universal. You don't have money, you can't take advantage nearly as much as someone who does have money. It doesn't matter whether you're black or brown. And I think I said this later on in the I have some crazy pauses, by the way. Later on in the conversation, that he later on, I've said this in later on in the conversation. Extend their acceptances, so to speak. That's not the word I want, but that would extend acceptances to people of poor areas, to kids of poor areas, to give them that education, to give them that opportunity.
So I did say this.
One could say redlining has an effect. One could say a redlining.
I shouldn't have given this to him whatsoever.
Redlining has an effect, but it doesn't really have an effect at that point when there are plenty of schools that extend their resources, that extend their enrollment. That's the word. Enrollment to people of poorer areas.
What you're talking about right now is literally DEI. Are you in favor of DEI?
I paused because he hit me with this. He hit me with DEI. He hit me with the fact that there are, and I guess, yeah, that in that sense, there would be a source of DEI in these programs, as it were. So even though I may not be in favor of, I'm not in favor of DEI, but what would happen instead? What would happen is that these programs aim, these programs have the intent and thus the outcome of getting more of a certain demographic into whatever institution of choice or of target that it seeks to get them into. Um, that said, the institution itself still has final authority to the institution, and thus the system itself has final authority of whether or not to let these candidates in. And they do. They don't have to. If the system was really that racist, they wouldn't get in no matter how many programs there are of letting these people in. The system itself would reject them because the system is racist. Now that I've gone through it like that, I can now more confidently defeat this particular argument because I can't really be in favor of I'm not in favor of DEI, and I can't really be in favor of DEI. No. I'm not in favor of DEI, and even if what I describe is maybe the fundamental tenet of DEI, it ultimately comes down to, as his point has gone on about outcomes, the outcome of the system itself to reject that because the system is racist. We don't want a particular group of people to be within the system, to thrive within the system, and therefore the outcome of that intent, oh, by the way, there's intent again. The outcome of that intent is that they don't get in, but they do get in, which means that the system has to which means that the system either is flawed in letting these cracks through, or the system wasn't really racist to begin with to allow these people in to begin with. No, that's not DEI. When
It's literally what DEI is. But
and I let him bull me over with this, but I didn't have the proper response back then. I think now I do, with the fact that even if this would describe DEI, the system itself, through the fact that it is racist, would not allow for such programs to let people through like this. Because the system is racist and favors one demographic or race over another. But because these people get through, these programs get through, and these people get through, clearly the system isn't that racist. It can't really be racist if it's just going to allow the undesired or the unintentioned the unpreferred race, to make headway within the system. We're only 4 minutes into this conversation.
beside that point, you said that it could. Redlining could do that. I mean, it doesn't take a brainiac to realize.
But did it?
Places of poor socioeconomic status,
But
the
did
house
it do
values are
that?
lower, right?
And how did it do that when other races are also suffer from this? Sure, but what
Which
would
means
have
that
to do
there's
with-
less money that goes to the schools from K through 12 education, right?
Where's the race in that though? Where would the race? That's just you're just
You
describing
don't
poor
need to.
areas.
It
Yeah,
requires.
he is. He's just describing poor areas. And poor areas are every race. There's poor areas all over the country. You can't name me a poor area and name me a school within that poor area that doesn't have the resources that a rich area would have. Of course. Duh. He's just describing. So, and some people in the comments
requires zero racist actors. I'm just
So-
explaining to you the system on how that happens. I'm
But
not saying black people can't get
the
ahead.
prompt itself is
I'm not-
systemic
I'm not-
racism.
yeah, the question is whether or not
the system
systemic-
itself is only goes against what essentially is just poor neighborhoods. That has nothing to do, like you said, it has nothing to do with race. At that point,
But you understand
it's
that
not,
minorities were physically pushed to these locations in the past.
In the past, but do they have those same forces pushing on them now? Do they have those same forces pushing on them now? The answer is no. The answer really is no. There's no forces pushing on. Since it was outlawed, that means that the forces that would be there to continue pushing on them aren't actually there. And what is catered to it, what is taking its place is simply the mindset, which isn't the system.
And when you go to poor socioeconomic condition areas throughout the country in the United States, it's overwhelmingly minorities.
But again, that was in the past.
In 2025, that's the case.
Where does that say in 2025 at this point?
What I'm saying, if you look at places that have poor socioeconomic condition status, it is overwhelmingly minorities throughout the United States.
Which includes black and white
but it's overwhelmingly black.
But there's still white communities that suffer from the same.
I went into, and this was the strongest point that I had throughout the whole debate, was he would try to say that only black people, that only these black minority groups were poor, and therefore because they were poor, they did not have access to nearly as much resources in their public schooling as richer neighborhoods. He's right. He's right. But where he's wrong is that he argues and is arguing, he's arguing that it's only, he says majority, but he argues as though it's pretty much only black people that suffer this kind of poor, unaffluent disadvantage. When anyone in a poor neighborhood doesn't have access to the same resources as a more affluent, rich neighborhood. There's a reason that Asians don't have this problem. And there's a reason why poor white neighborhoods do have this problem. So the system itself is universal because poorness and richness is based on the individual housing. And yeah, you're going to have tribalism, where you're going to have tribes of rich people being with rich folk and doing stuff for the rich, and poor people being with poor folk doing stuff of the poor. So, duh. Yeah, that's going to... But that's not racist, because that's just simply poor people with poor people, rich with rich. And I think I made this through this happens throughout the debate, throughout this conversation.
Same thing, which is why
that's not a rebuttal. That's not a rebuttal. You're acknowledging that it does exist, and then you're saying, but also this other thing. You're not.
Yes, because I can acknowledge that it exists only, I guess, in the past. But these are examples of things going against what you state. It existed in the past because the system itself wasn't geared for other racial groups, as it were. But now it is. And because it is, it's not racist, because other groups, because the group that this was for, there are some that are suffering. And for the group that this wasn't for, there are a lot that are not suffering. It's universal now. And it has been universal for years. Anyone can and does go through the system. It can't be racist. Otherwise, these people, we wouldn't have examples of people going through the system. We just wouldn't have them. If it was truly racist, and as outcome based as he claims it to be,
then there just wouldn't be examples of people making it through the system. There just wouldn't. Because those are not the preferred race to go through the system. It would only be white people, like it was before.
Debunking the clear systemic racism there. You're just saying,
Where? You just described poor people.
but also this thing.
You said poor neighbor. The premise behind your argument is that it affects poorer neighborhoods. Poor
Yes.
isn't black. It's just poor. You don't.
Okay,
You don't
so
go
if I
for-
showed you that black families fundamentally are poorer
How
than
would they,
white,
it doesn't matter that he would show that black families are fundamentally poorer than white families, when there are still white families that are poor and can't access the same thing. I think I tried to say this, but I got too caught up in my own words for me to really articulate it.
white families by like a long shot, you would concede this argument knowing that predominantly black people have been pushed down in society.
Also, some other people made it a point that he's essentially saying that only black people know how to be poor. And that's something that I really should have gone for, but I was too pressured and was too kind-hearted to really give him the wallop that was a slam dunk of this magnitude. So only poor people know how to be, so only black people know how to be poor? Is that what you're saying? To a black man, by the way. That would have been, anyway. In the past, sure, but
No,
you can't
not in the past. 2025.
You would have
Currently,
to be
right now, black families have a lot less money than white families. Period.
That still doesn't mean that the white families don't also not have money. That doesn't mean that. It doesn't. I wouldn't say that.
All right. Why do you think that is then?
Oh, what a terrible response. That's a terrible response there, Darius. Why did you I don't know.
Why do you think that is? I think it's because of systemic racism of the past. Redlining laws that reduce equity stake. When you have lower value houses, you can't actually, and the fact that they have been denied loans throughout the 60s and even upwards into the 70s. And even today, where we exhibit racist policies, even upwards into 2025, where banks are being caught discriminating against minorities because they considered loans to be too high risk. Simply,
where does it say that? Where does it say that? Where would it say that these loaners that these bank loaners would say that because these black people are poor, we will deny them loans, but these white people who are also poor will give them loans?
for their skin color, that would be an example of systemic racism. So I'm asking you, why do you think that black families are poorer on average than white families?
I was overwhelmed by pressure, nerves, and his line of questioning not making sense. I hate that I leave so much empty airtime. So much empty airtime because I was just trying to gather my thoughts of being pressured the whole time. I'm gonna leave it playing because I'm just like shoot. I almost don't want to keep watching this because it's like so. What could I have said here to avoid this open air? Because I know for a fact. What could I have said? That I could have gone back to the fact that, well, okay, what I could have said was, are you saying, would he be saying that only black people know how to be poor? No other race can. and could have gone at it from that angle. I could have gone into there's going to be a lot of just open air where I don't say anything, mainly because I don't know how to handle the pressure and how to vent the pressure off of me to be able to speak. And I think only it wasn't until like halfway through the open-ended discussion where I began to be a little more vocal. But yeah, I'm not sure how much longer I will continue to listen to this, because really, this is made it really it was just a whole bunch of dead air, a whole bunch of me sort of replying to 1stAmender, but not necessarily me hammering back at him. I didn't even get through 10 minutes of this because it is so cringe inducing to me that I didn't that I wouldn't have that I can't think of, that just watching myself squirm with nerves, that has nothing to do with the fact that you can still that poor areas don't just contain black
This is
people.
me coming
There are
from
still
coming
there-
to
That wasn't
trying
an
to
answer
put
to my
those-
question.
This is me trying to come back to the fact that poor areas don't just contain black people. And that was one thing that that other people have had mentioned to me as well, was that he kept hammering on, oh well, all these black people, all these poor areas contain black people, and it's majority black people. And it's like, well, are you then suggesting that only black people know how to be poor? It's a bit racist, isn't it? Don't you think? That's a bit racist of you, don't you think? Which would have been funny. I didn't think of it at the time, because I was just trying to get through it.
Right, but
I think I'm going to listen to another 2 minutes of this, and then I'm
when
just
your
going to end,
argument is
because
talking about the
the
fact
main
that
thing
poor areas
about
are
this
affected by
was
these redlining policies.
the
It
main
doesn't
thing
matter
behind
whether or not that it
most
happens to
of
be black
this
or
is
happens to
simply
overwhelmingly be
him
black
saying a whole bunch
or
of things,
anything. If
and
you
I
come
don't know
from a
how to
poor
handle
neighborhood
it,
and
and
it
so I
shows
just
on the
stay
map
quiet
that you
the whole
came from a
time.
poor neighborhood, a banker can look at that data and determine whether or not you would be a safe investment for you to get a loan from. Whites are denied in much of this. Whites would be denied in a similar situation as a black
So I'm not
person
saying
would at
that
that point.
white families can't be denied a loan. I'm not
If
saying
they
that
come from a
there
poor
aren't
area,
poor
they
white.
would be
I'm
looked
not.
at.
Yeah,
They
I'm
would
not,
be
I'm not
looked
saying
at
that there aren't
similarly
poor
as
white
a black
families.
family in that sense. So
I agree with
it's
you.
not.
I'm
It
not
has
saying that
nothing
there
to
aren't
do
poor
with.
white family or rich black families. Both of those exist. The question is not whether or not that there are poor black or rich black families as a rebuttal, or if there are poor white families. The question is whether or not that there exist systemic inequities, systemic racism, as in systems that result in racist outcomes in the United States.
But these wouldn't be. But those poor poor white families and rich black families wouldn't be a result, or wouldn't be the same result of of systemic inequalities, because the system is universal. The system would affect them too. That's what I wouldn't understand, is that the system would affect them as well. Because if that were the case, then the rich black families wouldn't still not have the same opportunities given to them as a poor white family. But a poor white family, and vice versa with the poor white family, yet if the outcome is the loners won't accept a poor family over a rich family because the rich family has a better history of investment and is a safer pick than the poor family, then a poor white family, it wouldn't matter that the poor family is white, black, or
white, black, or sage, they're poor, so they wouldn't get picked for the loan. They're poor. We kind of go back and forth throughout this most.
Given the fact, I mean, I still don't have an
We
answer
go
to
back and forth.
why is it that why are black families poorer than white families by like a long shot?
That's down to culture. That's down to the fact that a lot of the rhetoric surrounding black neighborhoods isn't that they are necessarily poor, but that they can't do it. And that's a culture thing that we tell ourselves. Why don't we do that? When all of the tools are there for us to succeed and have been there for us to succeed, grants, even DEI, even the DEI systems are there. Why we don't have those? Why we are still quote unquote poor? Because the powers that be don't actually invest into black communities to give us those in a sense, impart either the knowledge or the resources necessary, the powers that be. And then we also tell ourselves that we can't do it anymore, even though we can. We have. We can and we have. We have plenty of examples of people from black neighborhoods making it, from those poor neighborhoods making it. They exist. They've done it. But what doesn't happen is that those success stories aren't shared amongst the black population. We still think we are poor because we keep getting told that we're poor. That's not a system thing. That is a rhetoric. That is a cultural thing. That's not systemic, because the system has already changed to where the outcomes of us going into and through that system, using the tools within that system, means that we would be able to make it. It means that not only is there the possibility of making it just by going through the system and utilizing the tools within that system, but it means that going through that system means that we can and have made it. People have gone through the system all over it, through all walks of life, to where the system will favor anybody that is willing to go through it. Meaning it's not racist in that sense. It's not racist because there have been examples of people doing it. How can it be racist if there are examples to the contrary? If it's supposed to give us outcomes of people that it does not favor, then how come there are people that go through the system anyway who are of the class that it does not favor? The system wouldn't allow that. And that's what I should have gone through it. That's the main thing. I don't want to watch the whole thing. And it may, because it's really just me, a bunch of dead air, and 1stAmender talking the whole time. That is the clearest thing. The clearest distinction between, or the one of the main takeaways of this whole thing was I didn't know how to respond. I do now. Some of the main things that he was saying was redlining poor districts, and because black people are disproportionately poor, that means that the system is against them because they are poor. And since black people are poor, they know better than to try to go against the system because they're poor. And I may be misrepresenting that a bit, but the system doesn't favor poor people. And since black people are poorer than most, that means the system is racist because black people are poor. And it's like, A, there are rich black people, so automatically the system has failed. And B, there are so many different programs in place to let black people come out of poverty that the system itself is actively trying to make black people more affluent. Therefore, it is not really racist in that sense, because these same grants, these same proposals, these same scholarships are available to anyone and everybody. The outcome being that if you take advantage of these grants, of these various grants, you will go farther. You are given the opportunity to go far in life, which means that the system is then encouraging more to get out, which means that it's no longer a systemic thing that these black neighborhoods remain poor, because all of the all of the signs and tools say, come use them. They're here. It's known, the system itself is saying, I have reformed, essentially. I never went into that, but that's basically what the system is saying. Through things like the Civil Rights Act, the system then changed over to, I'm not racist anymore. Anyone can take advantage of the systems in place. I'm not discriminating because I have all of these tools within the system for anyone to succeed. And as a result, people of all walks of life have succeeded. Now, if your argument is going to say, well, black people are poor, completely ignoring that, well, what, poor white people, poor Hispanic people, poor Indian people, poor Asian people, then you're basically just saying that only black people know how to be poor. And people caught on to this, even though I didn't. And I could have really hammered in, okay, so you're basically saying that only poor, that the system is racist because black people are poor. So if black people were not, and this would have been, I don't know how far I would have been able to go with this, but if only black people know how to be poor, I actually don't know where I would have gone with that. If only black people know how to be poor, does that mean that every other race in America can't be poor then, or isn't poor? And you know what? I would have asked that. That may have elicited a silly answer, but I have to at least try so that I can come up with a better question next time. I need to at least try. I need to at least say something. None of this dead air. The dead air was the real killer here. The dead air was the real killer. I could have played off my ignorance. I could have played off the fact that a lot of the shit wasn't making sense, and I don't know how it was making sense. I needed him to explain it to make more sense. And I will do that for next time. Let's see if I can get past this last minute of the first 10 minutes of this back and forth exchange. But it's not really a back and forth exchange. It's mostly just Amender filibustering and me staying silent the whole time.
The United States.
I wouldn't consider that to be a question that pertains to the topic at hand, because the system itself that you're describing affects poor areas, affects poor people.
We
and
would
poor
go back
people
and
come
forth
in
on this.
many different races, and you want to talk about you want to mention redlining, but if it only adversely affects poorer people, there are poor people of any race. And so you can't exactly say that as a system that would disproportionately affect black people, when in this day and age, anyone with bad credit or anyone that comes from a poor area will simply be denied on the basis of the fact that they come from a poor area and they can't be trusted to be able to pay back the money that the bank is loaning them. So you can't use redlining as an excuse in the sense that, there's happens to be more black people that live in these poor neighborhoods. Anyone of a poor neighborhood would simply
repeating
be
myself as
denied
well.
a loan because
to-
they can't be trusted to pay.
Yeah, that's another thing. I repeat myself a lot. I need to say my piece and leave my piece. Despite all I say about not, I need to say my piece and leave it. I've said what I needed to say stop filibustering. And again, this was mainly due to nerves. Mainly due to nerves. This is mainly due to nerves and the fact this is my first. Definitely for the next time though, this will go a lot better. Because I will not allow myself to be pressured, or I'll feel a pressure, but I will turn that pressure into strength. And secondly, I will have my arguments more set in stone and more ironclad, and my responses more ironclad as well, so that I don't succumb to this pressure and there's not a whole bunch of dead fucking air. That's the biggest embarrassment. That I completely forgot and tuned out memory hold is the fact that I just let dead air exist. I won't get any clips from silence. So I need to do another debate. That's one thing is I need to do another debate. I need to, text various people. I need to actually go to places and actually speak my mind. I need practice. Back the loan that the bank would be giving them. Because I said the same thing about 3 times at this point. I should have finished after the first, maybe even the second time. And so it's not
Why
really.
can't they
it's
be
not,
trusted to pay back the loan?
Because why can't they be trusted to pay back the loan? Because they don't have the money savviness to understand what the loan would be, to what entails in a loan, and the fact that a loan isn't forever money that you get. It's money that you'd have to pay back, and that's not a concept that really goes over their head. They're poor because they're poor and they don't have the.
And why are they poor?
These are stupid questions. I'm realizing that these are just stupid questions because what does that have to do with anything? Why don't they know how to handle money? Understanding that those are one thing is I need to understood that was a stupid question because what did that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with anything?
And why are they poor?
They don't have the money at that point.
Why are they poor?
They don't have. Why are they poor? Because
why don't they have the money?
These are stupid questions. I should not have fallen for this, but I didn't know any better, so I did fall for this. They're poor. They're poor. I don't know because I don't know how this would make sense. I don't know how that would pertain to the rest of the conversation. I don't know. Why does it matter? I don't know why does it matter. That should have been my response. I don't know why they are poor. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to the prompt? I don't know what else to say. The poor people, so they don't have the money to be able to. They don't have the capital. They don't have the capital. They don't have the wealth to be able to show to a bank with a history of paying back loans that they are able to pay back loans. I don't know why. What does it matter?
Let me ask you this.
That's not a racism thing.
Let me ask you this. Is Brookings.edu a valid source to you?
I don't know. What does it have to do with anything? What does it have to do with the prompt? And I think that's what a lot of the rebuttals, a lot of my responses could have been was, I don't know. What does that have to do with the prompt? I don't know. What does that have to do with the prompt? I don't know.
What does that have to do with the prompt? I don't know. What does that have to do with what we're talking about? And I think he did that. He was asking these questions to get me off of the poor angle because that was, in fact, destroying him. I at least understood that the poor angle wasn't going to be a good angle for with which to combat me on whether or not systemic racism exists, because simply because there are poor people of all races, and those same poor people suffer the same consequences and disabilities that anyone else who is poor would suffer from. Not being able to take out loans, being ignored when it comes, or not having the resources necessary in their public education system to be able to further themselves as a community. Without the funds necessary, yeah, any poor neighborhood would not have the funds necessary to be able to go from K to 12 and be able to send their children to a good school because their neighborhood doesn't have the resources to have good schooling. That's just how poor areas work. That's not racist, that's just poor. So I did get him, but I fell for the trick of diverting the topic and entertaining his questioning, and just entertaining his line of questioning. I didn't need to do that. I could have just said, I don't know. What does it have to do with anything? And put the onus back on him. I will remember that for next time whenever I'm in a debate. Is, I don't know. What does that have to do with anything? And why? Because as I think back, I think I'm gonna end it off here because the rest of the debate is basically just gonna be this. He would go on to we would go on, continue back and forth, because I keep trying to come back to the poor point because it really was a strong point against his argument. I just never pushed for it. I never pushed harder on it because I was inexperienced. And I'll continue to say that because it's the truth, and I can't really say much else. But that's basically the debate in a nutshell, where I was pressured. It was my first debate. I was nervous, but I did hit him here. I got him here. He wants to talk about redlining and the fact that poorer districts see less resources into their public schooling, and that it's local property taxes that fund it. It's like, sure, maybe. I can't really verify that, but I can't verify that myself without some more research on my end. But even if that were the case, you have all of these other programs and these other grants. You have things like the whole opportunity zone thing in Trump's in one of Trump's major bills from his first administration. I forgot the name of it is. That set up opportunity zones for just these poorer areas that just so happen to affect these poor black neighborhoods. So, two things. Two main stipulations on why this guy's argument fell apart. One, on the topic of redlining, if poor neighborhoods, predominantly black, but if poor is not the determining factor to discuss,
he's basically okay. We're back, but okay, fine. Anyway, the browser has blocked your stream. Okay, doesn't matter. I guess we were lost a little there, but so two things. He I hit him really hard. I hit him hard on the fact that, you know, poor people, there are poor people of all walks of life. So therefore the systemic racism argument falls apart on the fact that there are poor people of all walks of life. A, B, they're examples of the disadvantaged areas, these disadvantaged communities where people made it, people got out. He wants to say could. He wants to emphasize that there could be examples, but there are examples. There's no could about it when you have examples of people that did it, that people that got out. And secondly, if redlining is such a problem, A, redlining was outlawed. So with redlining being outlawed, the after effects don't fucking matter. They just don't matter because at this point the system isn't actually disallowing these communities from bettering themselves. The system isn't there. The system's outcomes allow for the system's intent and the system's outcomes allow for people to get out so long as they know. But the system itself isn't really preventing these poor neighborhoods from bettering themselves, which means that it's something else preventing these poor neighborhoods from preventing them from bettering themselves. And also these poor neighborhoods, you could go on about, you know, it's predominantly black, but then that raises the question, are you then suggesting that only black people know how to be poor? And if the answer is yes or no, If the answer is yes or no, it really doesn't matter because you're suggesting the entire argument then hinges on the fact that you're calling black people poor, that you're calling black people only poor people. You're only calling black people poor and no one else. No one else has the ability to be poor because black people are the only ones that know how to be poor. And that's just racist in and of itself. A, and B, the system itself isn't that's not a system thing. That's a personal opinion and a cultural thing. That's a cultural thing of saying that black people don't know how to be rich and can't learn how to be rich. The system is there. You can talk about DEI all you want, but DEI only serves as the system responding and the system allowing for more of everyone to partake within itself. If the system was systemically racist, there would not be examples of the non-preferred race or ethnicities to make it through the system. The fact that we have all of these representatives in high places, in low places, and everywhere else means that the system can't be racist. Otherwise, these people would not be able to make it. And I think that he knew that. Or at least I'd like to think that he thought, that he felt that I hammered him on it. But because I'm so new, because I was so inexperienced in debating, he could have just pivoted off of it and I wouldn't notice. Unfortunately, that worked this time. Unfortunately. It won't work the next time though. And secondly, thinking the pivoting wouldn't be he could pivot off of this point because that's why he went into why are these people poor? Why are these what makes them poor are questioning. Because it didn't fucking matter. The real answer is it doesn't matter why these people are poor. They're still poor. So the system looks down on them. The system looks down. What does that have to do with the fact that the system is apparently racist if they are poor? And if these people are poor as well, how come they don't have as much opportunity to advance themselves as the black community? It doesn't matter if the median household is higher, they're still poor. They still get denied they still get denied these loans. So what does that have to do with anything? Why are they poor? That doesn't fucking matter. What does it have to do with the prompt? I don't know. What does it have to do with the prompt? He would need to have explained that, but I didn't know. I didn't know. And that was my bad. So the key takeaways of this debate review, and I couldn't get any farther than 10 minutes into it, like 12 minutes into the open panel, because I remember very vividly the fact that I left so much dead air onto the table, and I also let 1stAmender control the whole thing by filibustering and introducing points that did not matter. But there was dead air. Didn't know how to respond to pressure, couldn't get over my nerves, and I let filibuster man walk all over me with several points that did not matter, points that were multitudes and thus were confusing me, and points that just didn't make sense. But I didn't call out that they didn't make sense because I didn't know what to focus on, in a sense. And I let a lot of conversation on the table, and a lot of dead air happened. That wasn't a good showing, but it was also my first, and it won't be the last. I'll go into the next one, and then I'll be able to do a lot better. And another thing, I can weaponize my own ignorance at least until I know better. But then at that point, I can weaponize my knowledge. I'd be able to weaponize my knowledge because I'll have more to work with, more in the bank, more in the tool set to be able to combat whatever argument gets thrown my way. And I can just ask a lot of questions. Like, I don't know. What does that have to do with anything? With why are these people poor? Who knows, man? What does that have to do with the fact that the system that demonstrates that the system is racist? Again, you have a whole bunch of people that are poor of all walks of life: white, black, yellow, purple, green. What does that have to do with the fact that the system is racist? If all of these people are racist, or sorry, if all of these people are poor and systemic racism is based partially on redlining in all these poor districts, then clearly the system is an equal opportunity looker downer upon poor people. So it can't be racist in that sense. And then the second thing is that so only black people know how to be poor, white people don't know how to be poor, Asian people don't know how to be poor. And on that note, Asians have a higher standard of living than even white people, and yet they are also minorities. Why is it that those people don't get why is it that those people don't suffer from the same disabilities as white people or as black people even, yet they're minorities as well? I mentioned that later on in the debate, in the conversation. Why does white people? But he kind of just squirms away from it, and I don't pursue him on it because that in and of itself is a point of contention. If it's supposed to disadvantage minorities and minorities primarily, why is it that Asians, who are a minority, an even bigger and even smaller minority of the country than even black people, why do Asians have a higher standard of living than black people? What is it about them that make it so that the system favors them more than black people? And yet they're a larger minority. Clearly, there's something else to be had. Maybe it's, I don't know, cultural, which isn't systemic. That's a different conversation. But because of that, the culture behind the living conditions of that community make it so that they know how to work the system. We don't tell ourselves, black people don't tell ourselves how to work the system. We just wait for someone to say, here's the system, go play. Or actually, not even here's the system, go play, but we are going to put you in the system, which is exactly how it has been with slavery this whole time. That's also why they don't have to beg for our votes. Because they are basically saying, yeah, we're going to do for you. Trust us. And then we do, and then they don't do anything, and we still fall for their rhetoric. We still fall for the wording behind their words. I need to be more aggressive with my line of questioning and making sure that I don't get overwhelmed by several points, especially points that don't matter. I think about 2 hours of this has been cool. I didn't finish most of the back and forth because most of the back and forth is just going to be um, dead air. And we don't need to see that. We don't need to hear that. I think this is enough time. Anybody that like comes across this stream can basically hear me repeat myself several thousand times, as well as watch me repeat myself several thousand times. Actually, not even repeat myself because I didn't even get past 10 minutes of back and forth dialogue. It's really just me going over like 20 minutes of this whole debate and turning 20 minutes into like 3 hours, 2 hours. But those are the main takeaways. I need to be more aggressive. Like I think I wrote it down. It's like opening statements, focus on open. If they're going to be opening statements, focus on the opening statement. Any rebuttals that I have, save it for the rebuttal section. Don't conflate the two. I need to call out singular points more and focus on those singular points one at a time. No human is able to process several different points thrown at them at once. And of course, that is a debate tactic. That is a tactic that is used by typically one side. And humans in general, is they want to throw at you so much shit and then ask you to respond to all of the shit. And it's like, no, I can't do that. So let's start with one point and focus on the one point. Be more aggressive in my argumentation and questioning. Don't let dead air happen just because I was pressured and was nervous. Mainly I was just nervous. Shouldn't stop me from being curious, from being like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Please explain that. And then I need to say my piece and leave it. I've repeated myself about 3 or 4 times at this point over the course of this entire stream with the same points. I need to come up with other material. Now, it would help if I had a chat, but everybody starts off somewhere. I feel calm now, so I'm able to look at this and with a more objective lens and a much more calmer demeanor, especially because it's really just me. So, me and my own thoughts in my own head. So I can just kind of say whatever and leave it at that. But I do need to practice, and I will continue to practice saying my piece and leaving it. Because that's really what allows for the back and forth to happen. I'm not really taking up that much time. Really acting like a woman with the how much I can speak. But I also do much better with people in the people to bounce off of. When I'm talking just by myself, not only does it get a little lonely, but also it just kind of, like I said, I kind of start to repeat myself. But we'll get there. I just need to do this more. But for now, I'm going to end off because it's been a couple of hours. I'll come back to this. I'll come do something else like some games next time. Continuing through the Battlefield 6 campaign, even though it's kind of boring as shit. I can at least make fun of the Battlefield 6 campaign as I play through it and stuff. And also lock it. Anyway, for anybody that came through that happens to be listening or listens to this after the fact, I appreciate you coming through, and I will see you in the next time.